Good afternoon. Hopefully lunch was good. I want to introduce not the first person up there, Josh Crary. He was unfortunately, I believe, ill today, but in his place, and just as good, Brandon Drake is gonna is gonna be talking. Go ahead, Brandon.
Great. Thank you so much. Today we're going to be talking about creating accessible PDFs. So we're going to bounce around a little bit between this presentation and a couple pieces of software, just Adobe Acrobat Professional and Microsoft Word to kind of give you some examples. As was mentioned, Josh wasn't able to make it today. He is under the weather, so he definitely wishes that he could be here, but I'm going to try to do his slides justice, and we'll just go from there. So first of all, kind of preaching to the choir, why do we do it? Why is it important? And the truth is that many PDFs are not created with accessibility because they weren't thought to be made with accessibility when they were first created. This is an enormous problem because PDFs really aren't coming from one source on your campus. They're coming from all over. Every department is posting their own PDFs. Faculty obviously have their own course materials. Anything on the website that's going to be public facing. It's coming from all sorts of different places. So if you're one of those people that haven't thought about accessibility, your PDFs probably aren't coming out the other end as being accessible. So this is really important, of course, because this is one of the main ways that we're transmitting information to our students. The first thing that they go to, even prospective students, is they're going to our website, they're looking around, they're checking out financial aid, they're looking at the dorms. If they're posting PDFs and they can't take a look at them, or if they can't access them completely, this might not be the school for them, and we're missing out on some talent. And then, of course, when you get the students here, it's even more important. They're here because they want to access the curriculum. They try to get on the website, do things on their own. PDFs just aren't accessible there, and then they sometimes need to ask for help, maybe call the office and ask about processes or forms. And that's not something that we want to require students to do. We want them to be able to have the same access that everybody has right out of the gate. So obviously the big thing is providing that access. That's the real goal, but also we do need to comply with laws for equal access. So we're not going to get into all the laws, but essentially everything that you're putting on that website, you're owning. So you do need to be responsible for it. Even if you're sharing somebody else's document, you're taking ownership from it if you're putting it on your website or sharing it with your students. So how can you help? Like I said, this is a very broad topic because it touches a lot of different departments on campus. A lot of different people are going to be making PDFs. So sharing your knowledge, if you are coming from a certain administrative department, if there's a specific content creator that's really forming all of your documents, you want to be sure that they know about the accessibility principles that they need to keep build into the process. Advocating for these policies just across campus so we can support our students. A lot of times you'll find that people do want to do the right thing, and oftentimes they just don't know what it is or where to start, or even that it's something that they should be looking at. But giving them the tools that they need is definitely the first step. And this PowerPoint is going to be available on the website, so certainly feel free to pull anything from this, change it, add anything to it if you think there's something missing. So people can get a better idea. So it's kind of meant to also be a training thing to introduce people if they haven't been here at all. And ideally, we want to incorporate these kind of fundamentals, not just with PDFs, but thinking about accessibility across the board when you're designing your curriculums or setting up your office and your processes for getting students services that you're providing. So where do inaccessible PDFs come from? There's really two main sources. I think a majority of people here are going to be working with the first one, which is native documents that are being authored on your computer, typically Microsoft Word, and then you're saving it as a PDF. So those are typically easier to deal with. It's really important if you are making PDFs, you want to keep those source files that you're creating, not just for updates down the road, but if there is something with accessibility that you need to fix, doing it in the PDF really isn't a good option. It can do very limited things. You're going to want to go back to that original source file. So definitely keep track of those. Maybe have a folder on your computer for all the original Word documents, then another folder for all the published PDFs. The other one that you might not see as often unless you're working in the academic side is kind of poor photocopies. So we see this a lot working with students where something might be posted on Blackboard and it's a scan that a professor has used for the last 10 years. And sometimes they lose it and they need to scan it again. And it becomes worse and worse every time that it's scanned. Something Josh was going to mention was the telephone game where, you know, you tell somebody a message, they tell somebody, and then by the end you've got something that doesn't even remotely have all the information it started with. It's the same deal with photocopy scans. So if that is something that you're working with that you do need to remediate, again, finding that source material, if it's a really poor quality, being able to rescan it. And a lot of times the new stuff is going to be online. It's really interesting how many times I've had professors send stuff saying, I've used this for the last 5 years and it's become unreadable. Can you help me out? And just Googling it, and it's like one of the first things. So a lot of times you can find them, but just you do need to make sure that all those are accessible as well. And these principals are going to walk through how to do that. And like I mentioned before, if you are bringing like a third party PDF from an outside source, like an article from an online database, you do need to make sure that's accessible as well. Even though you didn't create it, if you're sharing it with your students, that's something that you're taking ownership of. So you want to make sure that those adhere to the accessibility principles as well. How to test for PDFs, how to test PDFs for accessibility. This is something that Josh definitely would be able to talk about a little bit better than me. He is a screen reader user. But if you are going to really take this seriously about if you are posting a lot of content and you want to understand the accessibility side of it, is trying out a screen reader. And there's a few options here, NVDA, VoiceOver, Narrator, and JAWS. If you did want to take a start, I would take a look at NVDA. It's great because it's free. It's an open source program. They're always upgrading it, and there's lots of support online. If you just type in NVDA into Google, it'll be the second one after NVIDIA's stock price. But once you download that, there's a lot of resources. Just don't take it lightly. Don't think you can just walk into it and just be able to use it. It does take a little bit of practice. And to kind of give some background to how screen readers work, because a lot of this is going to help screen readers work that we're going to talk about today. So when you're using a screen reader, typically it's for low vision users or blind users, but other people can use them as well. But what it allows you to do is forego the screen entirely, forgo the mouse. So if you're not looking at the screen, you don't use the mouse. Essentially, you're using the keyboard to access everything. And the screen reader is going to read everything that's going on. So you're able to navigate, you're able to open up programs, and it's going to tell you which program's opening, which document's opening. And then when you get in the document, it's going to read all the content. These principles that we're going to talk about today, a lot of it is about adding metadata to that content, which sounds a little scary, but it's really not. Essentially, if you use the proper formatting, it's going to give those screen readers a lot more information on what is happening in the page. So that will hopefully make a little bit more sense when I show you some examples of what that is. But definitely take a look at screen readers because it does give you some insight into how students with disabilities might be accessing your materials. Another way that you can test PDFs is a really simple way. If you're not sure if it's an image-based PDF or not, is you could just try to copy and paste the text. If you try to select it and it's not selectable, you're probably dealing with an image. And that's the worst kind of PDF that you could really be working with. There's ways to remediate that, and we'll talk about that. And then the last thing is running the accessibility checker, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail. So we talked about this a little bit. So what do you need to do first is go back to that native document. You can always recreate it as a PDF, but if you have it available, that's going to save you a lot of time. If it's a document that you haven't created, obtaining a high quality printout of the primary material is going to go a long way, especially if you're dealing with a PDF that has a lot of markups, highlighting, circling, underlining. The way that the text is brought out of that is through a process called OCR, which is optical character recognition. And what that means is the computer's actually recognizing the text, it's pulling it all out, and it's going to make it accessible for somebody who's using assistive technology. It only really works well if it's a clean scan. So if you're creating something new, you want to make sure it's not marked up and that it's typically 300 DPI or more. I usually do 400 DPI, which is dots per inch. That's just the type of resolution description for the image. So again, if there was a document that you're looking for that you didn't have the original copy of, you can oftentimes find them in databases like through the library or just a Google search. And worst case scenario, if it's like a faculty member who had notes from 15 years ago and there is no primary copy, sometimes you need to retype them. You can always suggest, maybe it's time to update your materials. Sometimes that goes over well, sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes the only thing you can do is retype and create a new file. And in the same lines, worst case, there's a primary document, you can't find it anywhere. Getting the original, chopping and scanning it is going to be the way to make a digital copy out of it. All right. So getting into the accessibility checker, I'm going to bounce out of this for a second, and I'm going to pull up Adobe Acrobat Pro. So this is one that we have available at UMass Lowell for any work machines. I'm not sure if that's standard across all of the campuses, possibly. Okay. So Adobe Acrobat Pro is different than Reader in the sense that it has more tools. You can author a little bit more, you can edit, you can create forms, things like that. So you do need the Pro version to use the checker. So to get into that, and I apologize, this is a little bit small, you do want to go to the tools, and you might have accessibility already there. If you don't, there's a little menu context button that lists all the possible tools you can have, and then you would just click accessibility and it'll show up in your list. So it's really simple to do from here. All you need to do is click on full check. The default should be fine. You shouldn't really have to change any settings. You just want to make sure it's checking for everything. Also, I've checked off to create an accessibility report. You might reference this later. You probably won't because everything is actually built into this. But once you do start check, it's pretty quick, and it will pull up a report to the left-hand side here. So if we expand some of these, we'll see a few of the different areas that it's checking. And for a little background, I wanted to find a PDF that I knew was very inaccessible. So what I did was I went just to boston.com. I printed out the first article that I saw as a PDF. So this isn't their actual website, and not a comment on how accessible they are. When you use the print function as a PDF, it strips all of the accessibility out of it. But just to give you an idea of what this report looks like, as a disclaimer, this is just an accessibility checker. This isn't going to remediate your PDF. This is just really giving you a baseline on where your PDF is at right now. And the great thing about this is even if you're coming in with no knowledge whatsoever, like a tagged PDF, if you don't know what that means, on any of these, you can right click. It's going to pop up with a little context menu that says fix, skip, rule, or explain. So the two ones you really want to focus on are skip and explain. But any of them, if you don't understand, you just click the explain. It's going to bring you to a resource that is going to explain a little bit further what it means, how to fix it. And there it is. So this whole document is going to have all of those different criteria in there. So as you saw, this one says you can actually fix it. So when you click fix, I don't think it's actually going to work on this. Yes, could not save page structure. So it's very limited what it can do. Sometimes, and again, I want to really stress that this isn't the way you should be remediating, because some people will see that fix, it'll turn into a green check mark and people will think it's great. The computer, when you do an auto fix, it's taken its best guess at what it's supposed to do, and a lot of times it's not right. A good example of that is alternative text for images. So if you had an image like this, there might be default alt text in there that just says image 1. And the computer is going to think there's an alt text there because there's text. There's literally one there, but is it useful? No, it's not telling you anything that's going on with the picture. So you do manually need to check these things out. It's a lot easier if you are creating these yourself. If you're looking at a third party's PDF, you don't know anything that they've done to create it, so you do kind of need to go backwards and start from the beginning. But now that we have this this printout here, we definitely have a better idea of where we stand. I am going to get into a lot of these different areas in the Microsoft Word document. But was there any questions about this side of it, or any comments? Anything anybody wanted to see? Oh,
I just have a question.
Sure.
Come up with us at UMass Boston. Is that when professors just post chapters online, then we get an email from the copyright holder that says you can't just post things online. So I know this isn't addressing that, but
yes.
that part of your process is, can you legally be putting this up here?
Right. So that is a good question. I don't have the full answer to that. There is fair use for some of this stuff where you can use a certain amount of textbooks or course materials, but obviously not the whole thing. I just don't have enough information to address that for you, unfortunately.
You said that you just said you grabbed something and did print to save as PDF.
Right.
Was if you're in a Word doc and you're creating something and you save as print, there's a different process, so you may get a different result, you said?
Yes.
Is that correct?
So
Can
that's
you
a
just
very
clarify
important
that?
distinction. Yep. That's actually the very last slide here, but we'll touch on it now. So you'll find sometimes where you can go on an internet browser or even through Microsoft Word, and if you go to print instead of save, you can print it as a PDF. And it will look the same, and it'll look like a PDF, and everything will look fine. But when you do that, it is stripping all the accessibility out. So you do want to make sure that if you're going from a Word document to a PDF, you're using the actual Save As feature. So you're going in and you're changing the file type to a PDF. And that way it's going to keep all of those tags for the document, so the screen reader will know what's going on. All right. So we are going to bounce back to our PowerPoint. So these are just for reference sake. We kind of went over these already, the different categories that are in the accessibility checker, what the little marks mean. So it's either passed, skipped over, needs a manual check. So even some of these things, the computer understands that it can't possibly know, like the reading order. You need to make sure the reading order is in the correct way. So that's something you have to definitely do manually. And then there's some things that the computer will know have absolutely failed if there's absolutely nothing like in an alt tag for an image. So we went over that. So again, can't stress this enough. It is a good tool, the accessibility checker in Adobe Acrobat. It's a good tool just for knowing an additional place where you stand in your PDFs. You shouldn't really use it to remediate. All of your conversions for accessibility should be done beforehand in Microsoft Word. So because of this, you do definitely want to try to track down the original files if you're helping out a different department on campus, like ResLife, fix their forms on their website. You just want to work with them so you don't have to recreate things from scratch. A lot of times they will save the Word documents. And if you are dealing with a third, an image scan, you want to try to track down that original source, so it's a lot easier to work with. So a lot of this presentation actually is going to be about working in Microsoft Word, because that's where accessibility is really going to start for PDFs. And these are the things you should be focusing on. I'm not going to go through all of them here because the rest of this presentation is going to hit each one and with more details about what it means. But we'll just dive right in. So the first thing is providing a descriptive title. So this is really easy to do. And again, I hope this doesn't throw people off. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between Microsoft Word and our PowerPoint. But adding titles is really easy to do. Of course, you want to make sure the title in your document is going to be descriptive and show a person what you're trying to do with the document. The file name you want to keep descriptive as well, not too long, but the actual title of the file is something that a lot of people skip over. And to do this, you would just go to File, and then under Info, all the way to the right-hand side under Properties, you're going to find the title. And this is a place where you can really be descriptive. You can use full grammar. You can put a whole sentence. So we can do sample syllabus for showing accessibility. And now when a person is using assistive technology and getting into this document, that's one of the first things they're going to hear. They're going to know the purpose of what this document's for. So if you're doing res life and you're doing housing requests, you would put housing requests in the title, and that way someone is going to know exactly what they're getting into. So a very simple thing to do just to start. And again, using the full grammar on that, you don't want to replace spaces with underscores or hyphens. Just type a normal sentence and it'll read a lot easier. Using built-in headings and styles. So when we talked before about metadata in the PDF, this is one of those things. So if this was saved as a PDF, all the text would be there. But something that makes it a lot easier to navigate for someone using a screen reader especially is applying headings. And again, fortunately, this is very easy to do. In the home ribbon up top under styles, you're going to find your different styles and headings 1, 2, and 3. And all you need to do is go to what you want to be a heading and click on the heading. And the basic principle here is that the first heading is going to be heading 1, and you really should only have one heading level 1 for each document. Anything under that's going to be heading level 2, and if you have subheadings under that, heading level 3. So try not to skip headings. So just as an example, we'll go through. This would be heading level 2. This would be heading level 2, and then all the way down, we'll keep doing heading level 2s for each one of these. Down here, this would also be a heading level 2, and then since this is a subheading, we would make that heading level 3. So that's all you need to do to give access to that. Just by doing that small thing, assume that this was a 20-page document and you were trying to read something and you didn't need to read the whole thing, you were just looking for a certain section. As a sighted user, you could go through and just say, oh, there's the major units and projects, that's what I need, I'll start there. If you don't put these headings in, there's not really an easy way to find that if you're using a screen reader. Once the headings are in there, you can use a keystroke. It's just hitting the H key, and it's going to cycle through all of those headings. So it'll read heading level 1, what it is, heading level 2, what it is, and then they can go right to that part. It's going to save a lot of time, be a lot more usable for a lot of students. Oh, and another thing about that, as you notice, this really changed the style of the font and everything. Another benefit of this is you can go in and you can modify these headings. So if we wanted to modify that heading level 1, you would just right click on it in the ribbon and select modify. And you can change what the text is, the size of it, the style, and then you can apply this to all your documents. So it's really nice because if you are working in an administrative office, now everything is going to be consistent across the board. Everything's going to look the same. It's going to be much more readable for everybody. So just an added benefit of doing that. So you can still have it look the way you want and still have it tagged with headings. Including alternative text with all visuals. So we do have one image in here. So this is just a picture of Wrigley Field. To add alt text, and this is true across the Microsoft Office suite, you would, again, right-click on the image, and you would go to Format Picture. And it's a little bit hidden. It's going to be in this little third icon, and you'll find alt text. So a lot of times, especially if you pull an image from a website and you're using that in a document, there might be a description already in there. Sometimes the file name goes in there, and it's really obnoxious because it's a giant string of letters and numbers, and it doesn't make any sense. So that's one of those things that the computer isn't going to check. It's going to see that there's a description typed, an alt tag that's typed, but it's not going to realize that it's useless. So you do want to check your alt tags. When you get into this, you can actually make a whole presentation on just proper ways to do alt tags. But the real rule of thumb is that you want it to be descriptive of what you're trying to convey. So if the whole point of this was to show opening day after they won the World Series, that's what you would put in the description. If you did just want to convey that it was Wrigley Field, you don't type image of, you would just type Wrigley Field. And now that user that's coming to that picture is going to understand what the purpose of the picture was. You can also type in, and this is a little debatable, you can type in an empty quote, and what that's going to do, it's going to prompt the screen reader just to skip this entirely. If it's like a decorative thing, if it's just breaking between two sections of the paper and it's just going to slow the screen reader user down, you can get rid of it entirely. But again, that's a little debatable. I've had a lot of users say that they want to know everything that's going on, so just make sure everything's tagged. So again, your mileage varies a little bit. But the important thing is you don't want any content that you're intending to get across to not get across. This might be an easier thing to do when you're done with the document, because once this is up, you can scroll through your document, click each image, this box will stay up, and you can add each one really quickly as you're finishing your document. And just one other note on that. So obviously adding alt text is important. If you are providing the text in the actual body of the paper, you don't need to do the alt tag. You just want to make sure the information is somewhere there. So if you are having a descriptive caption beneath it, you just need to make sure that you're getting all the visual information that's important in that description as well. So that's really the key, is making sure the information's there, either in the body of the text or in the image alt tag. And again, just a resource for later on, that's just the same process we just went through. Adding meaningful hyperlink text and screen tips. So here's an example just in the PowerPoint. A lot of times we'll see these, especially like on syllabi or on websites, where it says you have to check out all these resources, and they're not descriptive at all. They're just a list of giant links that are garbled letters and numbers, and it isn't very pleasant for sighted folks, especially if you had multiple ones, but especially if you're using a screen reader, it's going to try to read all that, and it's just going to be nonsense. So what you want to try to do is create descriptive titles for those. So we're going to bounce down here. This would be the same, again, in PowerPoint or Microsoft Word, but for links, you want to right-click on it and do Edit Hyperlink. And in this page, it's a little bit micro, but at the very top here, it says Text to Display, and the default is it's going to display the same text as the hyperlink, which is no good. So we want to make sure that that says something meaningful. So if this was a video of opening day at Wrigley Field, you would just type that in. And now the person that's going to be using it is going to see that instead. So especially if you're looking for a particular video, if this is like a resource that people are going to keep coming back to, and there's one video that they wanted to see, having to go through all those long links is going to be really obnoxious to find it. This is going to make it more navigable, more operable. So definitely use that as a rule of thumb, is renaming your videos to what they're going to. And again, just a walkthrough on how to do that. Something that does get missed by a lot of people is the reliance on color. So color is definitely useful. You don't want to forego using color at all, because it does catch the eye. So one of the examples here are dates that you don't have to go to class, or that's going to be held in a different room. If you did say just don't go to class on the days listed in red, if you're colorblind, if you're using a screen reader, you're not going to be able to access that. still use the color, but just use something else as well. So in this case, we just used an asterisk. So what the example is, classes will be held in Hart 322 on dates listed in red and marked with a star. So that will read out when the screen reader hits it. Now everybody is getting the same access, and sighted people are able to glance over and see clearly and quickly which dates, because you're still using the color. Using proper bullet and number formatting. So again, this is a lot like with the headings. This is going to make screen readers a lot easier to navigate. When they hit a list, it's going to tell them how many items are in the list, which item they're at. This is a really easy thing to do as well. We're going to go up to our list here. Oh, and actually, this one's already done. But we'll pretend like we're making a new one. So up top in the same home ribbon under paragraph, there's bullets and there's numbering. So if there's something sequential where you did need the numbering one after another, you'd use the numbering. If it was just a list with no particular order, you'd use the bullets. And if you click on it, you'll just start getting, they'll just pop up one after the other every time you hit enter. Seems like a very small thing, but again, once this reaches the PDF, it's going to make it a lot easier for that user using a screen reader to navigate it. They're going to know where the lists are. They'll be able to jump to the lists and go from there. And again, just the instructions for reference later on. Talking about using color again. So just some examples of what kind of colors you should use and what you should avoid. So on the left-hand side, we have some good colors that have really high contrast. So black on white, white on black, navy blue on white, white on green, and yellow on black. Those are all pretty solid options, hard to go too far wrong. And if a person's using assistive technology, they can invert those colors and they would still be high contrast. The bad ones are on the right side. So like green on red, you definitely want to avoid. That's one of the more common colorblind aspects, is not being able to differentiate green and red. That would just, you wouldn't be able to even read that. And then the rest aren't, very visually pleasing anyway, but especially if you get distracted, or if you do have a color vision problem, that would be an issue reading, especially over large blocks of text. And then the last thing is at the very bottom, it might be a little hard to read, is if you are using hyperlinks and you do have a background color, just remember that the hyperlinks are going to turn blue by default. So if you're using a black or a blue background color, those might just disappear entirely. So you just want to make sure that you're aware of that when you're publishing your PDFs. So what fonts should you really be using? There's a few principles from WebAIM for the kind of fonts you should be using. First of all, you should be using real text rather than text within graphics. So sometimes we'll have people that post images that have a lot of text built in, and there's really no point of that. If you are going to use an image that has the text, it's a lot easier just to have it all typed out. That way assistive technology can get into it. If there's a small amount of text in an image, like a banner that's decorative, you can put that in as an alt tag. It's just not ideal. So you want to basically select really simple and easily readable fonts, and we'll have a couple examples coming up. Actually, I'll make this big again. Use a limited number of fonts. So you don't want to jump back and forth between different styles. It can become really distracting for folks with disabilities. We talked about the contrast already for colors between text and background. Avoiding small font sizes. So for Word documents and PDFs, you want to stay above 11. For PowerPoints, it varies a lot depending on the screen size, but typically 28 is the smallest you want to go there. And if you can provide digital copies of that like you have now, that works out a lot better because you can make it as big as you want on your personal machine. Limit font variations like bold, italics, and capital letters. This can become really hard to read for folks with print disabilities, especially over large blocks of text, if it's all capital letters, it can become really distracting and really hard to follow. And don't rely on the appearance of the font. So like we talked about, not relying on the color of those dates. You also don't want to say, do everything that's listed in bold or do everything that's in italics. That's not going to be accessible for folks using assistive technology. You still can do it, but have some other type of way to display that these are different than the other items, like using an asterisk or another indicator. And then the very last thing, shouldn't come up in PDFs unless something has gone wrong, is avoid blinking or moving text. And just some examples that you can share for readable fonts. The top 4 are what's called sans serif. These, you can tell, don't have the little accents that the bottom 3 do, which are serif fonts. So like if you see at the bottom of Times, there's little hooks at the end of each end of the T. The general rule of thumb, and you're going to hear debate about this, is if it is going to be printed digitally and it's going to be used on the computer, you want to use sans serif, so those top 4. And if you're going to be printing it out, you typically want to use serif fonts. But again, your mileage may vary depending on the user. But it's hard to go too far wrong with any of these fonts. And then some not so readable fonts, things that you should probably try to stay away from, are the really thick fonts and the really thin fonts. And then also the really kind of artistic, sweeping, cursive fonts and things like that. You don't have to completely forego these fonts. If you did want to have a title, it's not awful in small amounts, but definitely don't use this for a whole paragraph. And if you are going to use it, make sure it's bigger. They become a little bit more readable when they aren't microprint. If you make them a title, just make sure it's a large enough size. Moving on to tables. So you want to use simple table structure and specify the column header information. So there's really 2 big notes about tables. Is you want to avoid using tables for layouts. So we see this a lot with documents, especially syllabi, when you can picture a syllabi at the beginning where there's the name on the top left and the room on the top right, and then the email on the bottom left and the phone number on the bottom right, and they're using a table to make things go where they want to go. This can get really confusing with a screen reader, because what's happening is the screen reader makes it to that table and it says, there is a table with 3 columns and 5 rows. And then it starts reading off each row and each column and each cell. Some are going to be blank because there's not information there and there's not going to be any data there. And it's going to be really confusing why this table exists. So you just want to use the formatting inherent in Microsoft Word to get things where you want to go, using the tab structure or using columns if you are going to use columns. And kind of the same point. So really tables are meant to be for data, and try to keep them uniform. When you make ununiform tables, that's where a lot of problems come. And I'll show you an example of that coming up. So this is just an example as well of the using a table for formatting. So in the end, the visual person might see the top image there, and what they're trying to say is basement toilets must flush up. But to get it to look like that, they made this giant 12-cell table and put each word in each different cell so it could be where it needs to be. But the way this is going to read is left to right, top to bottom. So it's going to read that it's a table and also basement, blank, blank, up, toilets, flush, must. So that isn't going to be too helpful for a student using a screen reader. So just use the formatting built in and it's going to be a lot better. And talking about those complicated tables. So this is a nested table that has several merged cells. And again, when a screen reader reads this, and I wish Josh was here to tell you a little bit more about it, but basically what it's going to say is something like table with 4 columns and 12 rows. And it's going to try to read that first row, and it's going to get to column 1, it's going to get to column 2, and there isn't going to be a column 3. And where did column 3 go? You told me that there was 4 columns. And it's going to be really confusing to navigate. So if you are dealing with a giant table like this, you're just going to want to rethink it a little bit. This is that same data put into a uniform table. this is showing those first two columns. Essentially, all that information is in one column now. So we have a couple repeats, but for the most part, it is a lot easier to digest than this. And something else that you might want to do is, if you do have that much data, possibly breaking it into two tables, if that makes sense with the kind of information that you're trying to convey. I've realized that we sent out the wrong version of this, the early version, and I haven't put in the descriptive titles for the links, so not great, but I could just say that's a test, and this is what we're testing. So essentially what you're supposed to be doing is using those link descriptions, but these are some of the resources that you can go back to for more information about the stuff that we talked about here. And aside from it being in the wrong format, it's also made it somehow into the middle of the presentation. But there is only a couple slides left. So there is also an accessibility checker in Microsoft Word, which we can go to. It's a lot like the accessibility checker in the PDFs. To get to this one, you're going to go to File, just like we did for the title document. We're going to go to Inspect Document, Check for Issues, Check Accessibility. And this is going to come up with similar stuff. So we can see that we're missing alt text on some things. If you click on any of these, it's going to bring you right to where that is. So you'll know that you're missing your alt text there. You can put it in after. Those merged cells that we talked about, we've got a couple tables here. It shows you the merged cells, why that's going to be confusing. And also, like the PDFs, a great thing about this is it gives you more information of why this is important. So down below, it gives you information on why you should fix it, how to fix it, and then again at the bottom, there's even more information. If it was a little bit more complicated, or if you still needed some more information, you can click that and find out ways to remediate that Word document. So this is just again, for reference sake later on, showing what the accessibility checker looks like and how to get there. And then the very last thing we touched on already from the question before is you do not want to print as a PDF. All of that hard work that you put into with the formatting, making sure that everything was in the correct way, so the metadata is behind it, that is going to get stripped away if you print it as a PDF. So you just want to make sure that you use the Save As feature and make sure that you change that file type to PDF. I'm going to show you one last thing. It should be defaulted as this, but if you're having problems with accessibility carrying over, it might be for this reason. So if we go to Save As and you get your, oh, it's going to give up on me now on the very last slide. There we go. So this is how you would change the file type. You just go down to PDF. And if you go to options, you'll see an options button pop up. It should automatically be selected, but document structure tags for accessibility. If that's unchecked, it's not going to bring it over and it's not going to be accessible. So if you do have that problem, maybe that's what's happening. So just make sure that's checked off and you'll be good to go. So that is actually the end. So I can certainly take any questions that you might have or comments or anything that I missed. Sure, there's going to be stuff. Yes.
I have a microphone here just so it picks up on the recording.
So I was wondering if you knew good ways to represent things like flowcharts or directed graphs, or the kind of graphics where there's arrows that have meaning.
So what I've done with flowcharts before, depends on how complicated they are and how much they're going back into themselves. That's where it kind of gets tricky. Sometimes you can get, if it's more linear, you can kind of get away with using a bulleted list with sub-bullets, and that can sometimes make sense if there aren't loops. But basically, what you might need to do is have a description of what's going on in text, to say step one is this. If not, go back to step one. So like that alt tag, you wouldn't want to put that much information in an alt tag for an image like that, because you want it to be able to go back and forth between it. So I would type that out after the flow chart to kind of give the instructions of what the flow chart is doing and the process you should take. But unfortunately, something as visual as that, there aren't too many aside from getting that info in text.
Well, I have this problem right now. One thing I was hoping to use was a table and using this is actually on the web, but not in a document, but the issue is the same. But using the table headers and the scope of the table headers to designate which cells belong with other cells. But it sounds like what you're saying about tables, maybe that's getting too complex.
That sounds like it would be a little complex. I mean, would all the cells be filled? Like all the way through? Would you have a lot of blank cells?
Yeah, all the cells could be filled, but just some cells would somehow be designated as having other cells. It wouldn't just have headers on the top and the side. It would have headers in the middle that were dominating other cells below them.
I honestly don't know. You might want to get somebody to take a look at that, a screen reader user to see how that would read. I haven't tried anything like that before. I've either done the bulleted list if it's a simple flow chart or having descriptions.
Yeah, probably better.
Let me have.
I'm not sure if I'm confusing this with web-based tables, but I recalled titles, captions, and summaries affiliated with web-based tables. Is that a feature that's available? Because I've done documents accessible for Word. I just don't remember if that's something worth bringing up here.
So web is not exactly my forte. I'm not. Nope. Yep. So there actually is. So like we talked about with alt tags for visual stuff, you can also alt tag tables. So it's the same option. You would go to table properties, and then they'll have alt text there. So you don't technically need table summaries as far as WCAG compliance, but adding a description to a table, it's going to do the same thing where you make it to the table, it's going to tell you what the table's about. So it gives a little bit more context. I mean, if you are creating that document or website, logically, it should probably lead into the table and let you know what it is anyway. But as long as the context is there, you should be fine.
Hi, I work in digital communications here at UMass Lowell, and our office is charged with taking the, 50,000 PDFs that are on the website and making them accessible. And my point is that I'm going to say 70% of that information shouldn't be in a PDF at all.
Right. Yes. That is a very good point.
It should be the content that's on your website.
Yes.
For 100 reasons.
You're right. That's a very good point. I should have put that in our PowerPoint. So not just PDFs, but also forms. We have a lot of forms that if you work with your web team, having those as actual web forms is going to be a lot more accessible. And I mean, PDFs are a little bit bulky to begin with. So having them in the web format, definitely a good point. If you can get it that way, that's going to be accessible more so out of the gate, less that you have to deal with. Mm-hmm.
So let's say you have this document, you've gone through and made it completely accessible, then you update it in a month. You have to redo this activity again, right? If you didn't start from the original document.
Right. So like this document, that last step, saving as a PDF, you should hold on to that Word document. If you got rid of that, then you do need to bring the text back. There's very few things that you can fix in Adobe Acrobat. So like if you just forgot to put in the tags for your alt tags for your pictures, you can do that in Adobe Acrobat. That's easy to do. You can add the title in Adobe Acrobat. But things like the table structures are a little bit more complicated. You'd have to come back. So it's a really good idea to hold on to those original files.
One question over here.
For disciplines that need notation, specialized notation, things like math or linguistics, disciplines where a software like LaTeX might be used,
right?
What are best practices in those cases?
So math especially has been kind of a moving target for me. I haven't had a student with math for a couple semesters, so I don't know what the latest thing is. But there's a few options. Using LaTeX is the big one. You can, with us, and I actually think I have it installed on this machine. So something like MathType is probably the premier one for creating math in Microsoft Word. And let's actually see if I remember any of this and if it still works. This is the demo version. So I'm sorry, I can't show you how it works, but essentially something like this, and I don't know if you can read how small it is, but you can type math in using MathML, which is a little bit easier than LaTeX. But you create math, it'll look like math visually, but it has all of the context behind it. So there's plugins for Microsoft Word where you can read it with NVDA. So you just give the Word document. If you have Math Player installed and Math Type installed, it would just read as it looks.
So would it be like the integral from X to Y of?
Exactly. Yep. So, if I can remember the website. I think I got it. So there's a website called Wiris, W-I-R-I-S. And we'll see if we can pull that up. So this is a really helpful one, especially if you're not buying any of the software. Whoa. Every time I try to do a demo. All right, so let's see if it'll show this. All right, they've changed things around a little bit, but essentially what can happen on this website is you can type in math using either this graphical user interface where you can just click on what you want it to do and it will put in those numbers, or you can actually type out the MathML code, but it will translate this to English. So it would actually read it out in math. So it would be x equals fraction negative b plus or minus square root of b squared. And you would have that text. You could actually copy and paste that into a document. Not the best way to do that. You should really be using the code and they should be accessing the MathML code. I have had students that are really not computer savvy that I've done this for because they were just trying to get through a certain piece of math. So having just the language of the math there was enough for them to get by in that moment. But if you're definitely going to have like a math student that's pursuing math, you want to do it the right way and have them be able to author it on their end and read by the professor. Got a question over here?
Have a question? Anybody? Oh, sorry.
So if you have a PDF that's predominantly image with text, are you pretty much in trouble?
This isn't going to show you too much here, but again, there's a couple different pieces of software that'll do this. Adobe Acrobat Pro will. The same place where we had the accessibility, there's text recognition. So if you did have that scanned image, you can try to recognize all the text that's in the file. And when you do that, it's going to still look the same. It's going to look like the same exact scanned image, but now all the text should be there. If it's a really nice, clean scan, it's going to do a really good job. You might need to pull that out and put it into a Word document that you can add accessibility for like tables and images and things like that. But that is the first step, is doing a process called OCR. So that's in here. Abby Fine Reader, Read and Write Gold, Kurzweil, those are all OCR programs. That would be your first step, is if you had a scanned image.
Anyone else? I think we're all set.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brandon.